There are critics who are saying that you are encouraging love jihad in a way.
ये होता क्या है मुझे समझाइए मुझे
So,
समझ नहीं आ रहा,
love jihad, the idea is that if a Hindu girl is converted in when they fall in love and a Hindu girl converts to Islam for a boy, then that is love jihad in the sense that they are adding numbers in a way.
आपको अपना शौहर कबूल है?
कबूल है.
No, it's pretty full-on stuff. It is about Christian and Hindu girls being taken into the religion of Islam, being trafficked, being treated badly and potentially becoming terrorists. There's no doubt that it's strong stuff, but it was met with a protest, and Shakil Afsar is a regular protester. Here was him bursting into that cinema in Birmingham's Broad Street at the weekend.
You should be ashamed of yourselves. You should be ashamed of yourself. This is propaganda. Sunni world should be ashamed of themselves. See that we have lived coexisting with Hindus, we have coexisted with atheists, with Sikhs for many years. This film by the Narendra Modi and the BJP Harami Hindutva RSS has been made to divide us.
Well, Shakil Afsar joins me now. Good evening. Thank you for coming on the programme. I'm very struck watching this.
Yeah.
Let me show you a quick clip of you taken, I think, last.
Fire away. Of Birmingham will not tolerate the disrespect of our Prophet, peace be upon him, and there will be outcomes from your actions. You will have repercussions for your actions. We have been trained from birth that we must defend the honor of our Prophet, and we will lay our life on the line.
You know, to say about another religious group, which you very clearly say there, we've been trained from birth to defend ourselves.
We have.
There will be repercussions.
And absolutely there will be.
I would say to you, if I was a copper watching that, I think, well, this actually is a direct threat.
Now to an issue that has shaken the Asian community in the United Kingdom. Thousands of girls have fallen prey to what's being called grooming gangs. Sex traffickers and abusers, predominantly British Pakistanis who target Sikh girls.
These girls are the victims of a multicultural revolution, and it's certainly an indication of the fact that this accusation of racism is potentially the most powerful political weapon known to man. This is also an example of what can happen in a country of 60 million where the press just refuse to report, where the cries of all these agencies fail to merely discuss what's going on, and it's only going to get worse for this reason.
When Hernaz first met her abuser, he seemed kind.
Met on Diwali. It was in a public place. We bumped into each other. I fell and he gave me his hand to help me up.
Hernaz was only 16 when the man began the process of grooming her. They exchanged phone numbers and talked for days before their first meeting in a park.
Never had that interaction with a male, where the male wanted to listen to what I had to say about the stuff that was happening in my life at that time.
Hernaz felt special. This form of abuse starts off slow. The groomer will pretend to be a caring friend, buying gifts and listening to her stories, all in an effort to gain her trust before turning on her.
Well, it happened on the second time that we met. I never thought twice about it. When I got in the car, I never thought that he would lie to me about where we were going, but also who would be there. I was taken to a B&B.
The men plied her with drugs and alcohol and raped her. It was just the starting of her abuse.
I mean, when you counter an issue that is just so unbelievable, just so outside your frame of reference and understanding, the immediate human reaction is just not want to believe it at all.
Perhaps even harder to believe is that while there have been prosecutions, British authorities have still not stopped this criminal activity.
Hernaz was only willing to tell her story to Mohan Singh, a face she trusts.
He's been trying to help victims of grooming in his community for over a decade.
Some say grooming gangs originate from a particular region of Pakistan, but others point out that the Quran encourages Muslims to take enemy women as sex slaves. ISIS defends sexual slavery as Islamic, saying enslaving the families of the infidels and taking their women as concubines is a firmly established aspect of the Sharia, or Islamic law. The reason these crimes were covered up and continue to this day is political correctness. No one wanted to be called a racist. The definitive book on this scandal is Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin, who declined an on-camera interview for safety reasons. He told us journalists would not speak about it because the perpetrators were mostly dark-skinned and Muslim. Childcare professionals used political correctness as an omerta, a code of silence concerning what the public was allowed to know.
The plight of girls like Hernaz is the reason behind Singh's mission to visit every single one of Britain's 300 gurdwaras.
Today, he's visiting the biggest one in London.
Now, sexual grooming.
He helped set up the Sikh Awareness Society back in the 1990s after growing concern within his community that young children were being sexually abused. But his advocacy has spread to other South Asian communities.
We are aware of Hindu girls also being targeted by these grooming gangs.
Many South Asian communities are honor-based with deeply held traditional religious views. For many, virginity before marriage is held sacred, and it can make it very difficult for the abused girls and their families.
In fact, that's the part of the grooming process. You pick on the most vulnerable people, you know about their culture, you know that it will be taboo in their culture, and they use it against them.
Singh's lectures are uncomfortable listening for most Sikhs. The sexual grooming of girls can be a taboo subject in this community. One of his biggest battles is persuading families to reach out for help.
What you do not have is any example of non-Muslim men targeting Muslim girls for this organized form of abuse. So the argument that this crime exists everywhere is not only false, but is being deliberately cultivated by the media and by the government inquiry that is kicking the can down the road.
The grooming gangs have been traced back as far as the late 1980s. At-risk white English girls, often from broken homes and some as young as 9 years old, were wooed or groomed by teenage Muslim boys called Romeos, and even by groups of Muslim men who hung around school gates. The plan was to make the girl feel important. She was given gifts and drugs, but she was being groomed to be a drug-addicted prostitute. Then came the gang rapes. The girls were threatened with death if they tried to flee.
It may sound extreme, but many Sikh parents believe they had to move their children because they were in danger here in the UK from Muslim groomers. It's a deeply controversial accusation, but the two faith groups have a history of religious conflict.
You know, I can only speak on the evidence that we've collected since '97. And we're dealing with gangs of people, we're dealing with groups of people who belong to one ethnic group, who belong to one sort of faith.
Through the data, statistics, and what's happening within the criminal justice system, we know that the majority of the perpetrators are caught with Pakistani men. So it's something which the Pakistani community really needs to take hold of to ensure if this is being engendered within their community, it's going to create not just problems externally, but for us, what about your own women folk? You know, if you're able to pick on other vulnerable women, how much do you respect your own?
I said and made very clear, if the majority of country is white, then it's natural to see the majority of representation in any crime to be by white people, because we're living in a majority white country. What is concerning is if pockets of our country, communities like ours, are disproportionately involved in any one type of crime. That disproportionate number raises questions about our attitudes, our meaning British Pakistani men, our attitudes towards the rest of society and whether we have a Muslim supremacist attitude.
There's a particular problem involving Pakistani heritage men who target young, vulnerable white English girls. Not my words, but a member of parliament, Jack Straw, who also said these Pakistani heritage men view white English girls as, quote, easy meat. This is when some shout racism, but here are the facts. Calculations based on convictions show that a British Muslim male is 170 times more likely to be part of a sex grooming gang than a non-Muslim. And there are no recorded instances of non-Muslims doing this to Muslim girls as part of a criminal enterprise. In one local jurisdiction, it was estimated that 6 out of 7 Muslim males either knew about or were part of a grooming gang.
If a Sikh man does something wrong, label it a Sikh man. If a Muslim is doing something wrong, label it. At least we'll know at the end of the day where the problem is by calling a spade a spade.
It was the first ever case involving a Sikh victim of sexual grooming to have been successfully taken to court. The perpetrators were sentenced but have now been released. For Singh, freeing a victim from the clutches of her abusers is his greatest achievement.
The joy, inner peace that comes when you can bring peace into somebody's life. I don't have to wait to die to see heaven. I see it then.
He sees this work as his life mission, to stop the gangs abusing any more girls.
It's not just sexual abuse. It is unspeakable levels of violence.
The cover-up was eventually exposed, yet the grooming gangs continue to operate. One victim told a British newspaper, "Nothing has changed, not in the slightest. It's still the same scale as before."
If you are a young English girl, particularly between the ages of 9 and 14, and you find yourself subject to the perversions of Muslim men, you effectively exist in a country where the forces of law and order don't exist at all.
The grooming gang scandal is a stain on our country. Local reviews in Rochdale, Rotherham and Telford expose the systematic rape, abuse and exploitation of vulnerable young women and girls by organised gangs, almost all of them British Pakistani men.
In 2014, an inquiry found in Rotherham there were more than 1,400 victims of grooming and sexual exploitation between 1997 and 2013. That's just in one town, but it gets worse. Then it happened in Rochdale. And then in Rochdale, they found that basically sentences were given up to 19 years because of crimes committed against girls between the age of 13 and 15 in and around Rochdale between 2008 and 2010. Then there was a case in Oxford in 2013 where 5 Muslim men were convicted and handed sentences at the Old Bailey for exploiting girls between 11 and 15. All of the men were of Pakistani origin, except for 2 who were North African, also Muslim. Then it was in Bristol, where 13 Somali Muslim men were jailed for more than a total of 100 years after they were convicted in 2014 of running an inner-city sex ring. Then in Aylesbury, 6 South Asian men were jailed in 2015 for grooming underage white girls between 2006 and 2012. Then in Peterborough, a total of 10 men were convicted of child sex crimes in the town, and the boss, Muhammad Khobaib, who was originally from Pakistan, he was jailed for 13 years at the Old Bailey after he was found guilty of forcing a 14-year-old girl to perform a sex act on him. And then, you know what, it's too depressing to carry on. It goes on and on. The pattern in all of these, overwhelmingly, is South Asian Muslim men, primarily Pakistani, sometimes Somali Muslims, sometimes North African Muslims. It doesn't help us. One of the main defendants in trial argued that it's his religious right to have sex with underage girls, and that was his defense. Look it up. It is unbelievable. And you and I know that that kind of argument gets bandied about. You and I know, and if you don't believe me, again, look it up, that in Pakistan, you're in my country of origin, where our parents are from, when they tried to raise the age of sexual consent, it was shot down by the Ideological Council of Guarding Islamic Culture in Pakistan, shot down in Parliament and deemed blasphemous for trying to raise the age of consent. Because religion gets involved, culture gets involved. We've got to be able to have this conversation without being in denial. This is what frustrates me. Why was that your first reaction to the topic instead of thinking of the girls? And that's why I think it's about time that we just stop pretending this isn't a problem and address it head on, recognize there is this disproportionate problem within our communities, and worry about the victims before we worry about you and me. We're Pakistani men. We can look after ourselves. Those young girls couldn't.